What else could it be? And so the fact that in this high system justification condition, people become equally likely or equally receptive of a non-unfairness-based explanation really shows the power of this motive in terms of shaping our beliefs. Now, I'd like to also point out that this exact same manipulation has really interesting policy implications. So we can put people in this low inescapability or high inescapability condition. They feel they can't leave their country, or they can. And then we can ask them the extent to which they support redistributive social policies. So these are policies that are going to help fix inequality. Things like affirmative action, things like literacy programs for the poor, things like training for women to or networking opportunities for women to enter business and so forth. And what you see is that when the system justification motive is increased, people become less likely to want to support these policies. And these are measures of volunteering to help with them, voting for them, giving money to them, and also just signing petitions to endorse these policies. So as you feel more inclined to justify the system, you become less inclined to want to do anything that's going to fix this inequality, because you think, well, this is probably the way it should be. Okay, so just to summarize where I've kind of gone this far, just with these two studies, what we're seeing is that in the context of societal inequalities, as we increase the system justification motive, people become decreasingly likely to blame inequalities on the system, increasingly likely to blame inequalities on genuine differences between men and women, increasingly likely to view these inequalities as injunctive, that is, as the way things ought to be, increasingly likely to derogate those who act in ways counter to the system, and also decreasingly likely to support policies aimed at rectifying these. Now, I just presented you two studies. Each of those studies comes out of full papers that have 5 or 6 studies, and if people want to hear more details about this data, I'd be happy to talk about it later. Now I'm going to switch gears slightly. How much time do I have? 5 minutes. I'm going to skip study 3 entirely, but doesn't it look interesting? And move right to study 4. In study 4, so in these studies we were sort of interested in very explicit or direct defenses of the system. We also have lots of work showing how people can defend the system via ways of different feelings or preferences towards people that are tied to the system in different ways. Now, one of these ideas, it makes quite logical sense, is that to the extent that people are motivated to justify systems that control them, they should be highly motivated to justify those people that control those systems. So examples, in the US, George Bush or a Chief Justice, these people control the system, and if we do have a motivation to feel our system is good, we should be motivated to justify these people to some extent. In Canada, we have our Prime Minister, Stephen Harper, who doesn't look as official as those people, I'll grant, but he too controls the system. And so 2 questions we asked is when we increase the system justification motive, are people A, going to see people like this as more competent, that is more suited to their position? And B, will they also defend these people in other creative ways? One way we think people may be able to do that is through finding ways to excuse faults in these people. So I won't read that first quote because we're a little short on time. The second is New York Times blurb where it says that, talking about the Lewinsky-Clinton scandal, those surveyed sharply distinguish between private and professional conduct in the Oval Office. An overwhelming majority, 84% in fact, agree with the proposition that someone can still be a good president even if they do things in their personal life that you disapprove of. So what we're interested in here is not only will this motive make you actually prefer these people in terms of competence, but will also provide you with the means to come up with creative ways to forgive them when they may do things that you think are questionable or call into question their integrity. So in this study, and these are 2 studies I'm going to sort of combine, what we do is we strengthen the system justification motive through threat or no threat, and then half the participants read about an Ontario Minister of Education. All our participants were Ontario students, and they're given vague information about her history and her accomplishments. Then they're asked to evaluate her competence. Okay. The other half are also given the same manipulation, but then they instead read about a different Minister of Education, and none of them actually know who the Minister of Education is. I didn't know who it was myself until I saw the stimuli. They read about a different Minister of Education who's a man this time, and they're told that person has had an affair. And then they're asked to judge the extent to which one's personal life should be reflective of someone's performance on the job. So, what we see is first we can look at ratings of competence of this leader based on if they're under system threat or not. What you see for competence is that under high system threat, you think this leader is significantly more competent than if you're under low system threat. Also, we can look at the extent, when they look at the leader who had this negative thing in their personal life, to what extent do you disassociate? Do you think one should disassociate one's personal life from ratings of their job performance? And again, what you see is that under high system threat, people think that it's a better idea to dissociate one's job from one's personal life if their leader has recently committed something negative. Now, if I do this exact same thing, it's not just that system threat makes you like everyone better. If we do this and we tell them about leaders in New York State or leaders in a different province of Manitoba, system threat has no effect on how competent they think they are or whether or not you should, whether or not having an affair is relevant to how good of a leader you might be. It's only if they're a leader of your own relevant system. And I think I will conclude here. So basically what I've tried to show is that the system justification motive can profoundly impact political thought and action and social thought and social action. And it does in ways that lead to the resistance of system blame and the assertions of system fairness. Now, system justification itself can seem like an ideology, and I think it is. The other speakers are probably going to talk more about conservative and liberal ideology. These findings all interact with that in a really interesting way. We tend to find, which may surprise you, for instance, that liberals are the ones who respond to our threat manipulations, not conservatives. The reason I think for that is that conservatives kind of walk around thinking the world is quite threatening, and they're already pretty ceilinged on our effects. So if we take our effects apart, you'll see that liberals under threat become more like conservatives, basically. What I think is really important to note also is across the 30 or 40 studies we've run on this in the last couple of years alone, not a single participant, and we debrief very carefully to see if they can understand where their responses came from, why they endorse this policy, why they don't like this person. Not a single person has ever attributed a single response to this motive. They don't really have any awareness of this motive, and they also don't think that manipulation could have affected their responses. I'd also like to mention that I don't want people to think that the system justification motive always dictates our feelings. It's contextual. Certain situations bring it out. And also we have other motives of self-interest, of group interest, like Mazarin referred to. And these are competing motives, and sometimes, or often maybe even, will take precedence over the system justification motive. But what we'd like to argue is that when the contexts are right, when people are under threat or different situations, the effects can actually work in counter to these other motives. So for example, our respondents in studies 1 and 2, in which they derogated a female experimenter and women as a group, were all women participants. Also, I draw your attention to the Bush approval rating. So on September 10th, 2001, his approval ratings were around 50%. On September 15th, his approval ratings were 86%. And you might think this is a function, well, simply of the fact that when we saw how adeptly he handled this crisis, we learned he's actually a better leader, and so approval ratings went up. But you should keep in mind that work by Rob Rillo, for example, has shown that it's not just his approval ratings in terms of security. For instance, after these threats, whenever the threat level goes up, for example, on your little color thing, whenever the threat level goes up, people don't just justify his abilities in security, but think his economic policy is also stronger. And so I am going to just acknowledge my students and collaborators, and I will stop there. Thank you.